Mycospawn in River's basement. April 1st came around on a Friday when River and I made plans to take Mycospawn at his place for a classic basement experience. Before I headed over, I made sure to polish up what I had recorded of my song Cotton Serpent and put it on my ePod J so that we could listen to it while under the guidance of Silocytes. I figured if the song had any power-tripping merits, the Mycospawn would detect such, and the listening experience would be like no other. I cannot recall where these Mycospawn came from, nor how much we ended up taking, though it's most probable that we split an A+ dose as was custom. I had plans for us to come up while listening to the album Dandelion Gum by Black Moth Super Rainbow, a magical stew of punchy beats and spaced out synthesizer landscapes. I had intuitions that this album might be trippy enough on its own without the aid of Mycospawn, and that combining the two might prove to be too much to handle, but I knew we could just turn it off if push came to shove. Almost a year since the first time we split an A+ dose together, it was time for another journey into the great unknown. We had the basement as our home base and wouldn't have to deal with the influence of any other people, nor any unpredictable variables. It was just us and the Mycospawn. With plenty of drinking water available and a green power vessel loaded and ready, we consumed our halves of the Mycospawn, consumed the green power, turned on Dandelion Gum, and waited for the influence to roll over us. The first song was Forever Heavy, a slow beat that opens with a harpsichord rhythm section and a playful bass. In no time, this is accompanied by synth flutes and the vocoded lyrics, chewing on bubble gum, lying in a field. It was a great mood setter. We received the feeling that we were simultaneously having the chillest of times and embarking into a realm of mystery. There was no shortage of ecstatic laughter between the two of us, and plenty of woes of amazement as we confirmed shared visuals in the room. The walls waved at their borders, as if the sound waves were vibrating the room like they would water. The next two songs went a similar way, in that they were equally bestowing of ecstatic empowerment and possessed an ominous edge. For example, the third track, Melt Me, has a lively bass line and constant tambourine that brings to mind a beach party, but that party hits a tripped out level when the tape distortions kick in, something I imagine could be responsible for the track's title. River and I kept on keeping on, however much water we anxiously consumed in the face of the fast come-up. Then came the fourth track, Lollipop Psychord. Unlike the previous three tracks, this one starts with unsettling bits and remains more or less unsettling. It couldn't have been more than 30 seconds into the song before I got up from my seat and marched over to my ePod J to turn it off. I just can't take it anymore, I half-jokingly declared, to which we both burst into laughter. We reflected on the hilarity of having to cop out only 4 songs in. The experience confirmed that intuition of mine, that the album was already Mycospawny enough to feel transcendent, and we had merely thrown fuel on the fire. My memory of the experience grows less vivid, but I do know that we decided to put on Animal Collective's album Merriweather Post Pavilion next. For anyone who knows this album, it might seem like a funny choice of a record to put on after abandoning Dandelion Gum for the reasons that we did, but I can assure you that in the realm of challenging vibes, Merriweather Post Pavilion is much more manageable. We felt the effects of Silocyte's influence on our brains without question, and that was certainly an augmented way to experience Merriweather Post Pavilion. We reasoned it was perhaps even the way Animal Collective would have wanted. I wish I could recall more moments from that listening session, but the moment I remember most was when the second to last track, No More Runnin', came on. My dad had given me a box of Hot Tamales, a red, chewy cinnamon candy, to bring over to River's house. I enjoyed a past of eating tamales quite a lot, but failed to realize the implications of ingesting them during a Mycospawn-influenced state before it was too late. As I chewed the candy pieces while listening to No More Runnin', the slow tempo of the song and the stickiness of the candy in my mouth seemed to synchronize, and I became bothered by the sensation of candy stuck in one of my back molars. I kept running the tip of my tongue over the area where the candy was stuck, and started to irrationally worry that the heat of the hot tamales had started melting my tooth, and that the gummy surface I felt in the crater of my molar was not candy, but rather the raw gum of my mouth. I realized that this was a ridiculous thing to think, and tried laughing it off, but for some reason I maintained an unshakable paranoia. Who was I to think I knew, with a capital K, what was really possible in this reality, and what wasn't? I was sure I didn't know the ins and outs of Silocyte's Mycospawn, and for all I knew, the simple fact that I was experiencing the sensation of a melting tooth could have been enough to make it come true in some twisted way. Could my tooth actually dissolve due to the fiery power of a hot tamale, partly with the help of me thinking that it was melting thanks to tricks of Silocytes? The swampiness of the music didn't help as the vocalist Avi Tare sang, "No more runnin', says my mind," and I thought that this could be a message from Silocytes telling me that there was indeed no more running away from my uncomfortable feelings from the present moment. I had experienced the realms of all the other songs. Why should this one be circumvented? Was I really just going to turn off this bad vibe too? Perhaps the message was something along the lines of, you can't always turn off every bad vibe that comes your way, but instead have to move through it. Regardless, I asked River to grab me a toothpick from upstairs and managed to get the hot tamale goo out of my molar. I laughed hysterically as I realized that I had moved through yet another false alarm of paranoia. I can't say I've eaten the candy since, whether that decision is related to the incident or not. We finished off the album with the last song, Brothersport, a song that is impossible to feel bad while listening to, what with its sheer jubilance and childlike demeanour. It seemed that I had not only moved beyond the most challenging aspects of the experience, but had also arrived at a blissful state, the realization that our trip into the great unknown had been a success. However temporary in nature it was, I experienced a sort of enlightened state where I felt the true magic of existence. I'm not implying that I think there is a one and only enlightened state that one can experience, so that's why I qualify it as a sort of enlightened state. In an effort to capture the nature of this state for analysis down the road, I took out my notebook and tried to put the feeling into writing. It's like you understand the everything of everybody's everything. It's like you're dreaming everything you can dream. The best I can describe this sentiment is that no matter how negative or strange a thing or experience I could think of, such a thing was always justified in its archetypal existence, however convoluted some arguments would be for the worst of the worst. I felt no confusion about the state of anyone or anything. Everything was the way it was supposed to be, the only way that it could be in fact, and in virtue of me having no issues with the state of anything, or rather not having the audacity to think that I could know better than the force of the universe, I arrived at a state of ecstasy and solidarity with a primal creative force. Everything that had happened was both necessary and sufficient in the grand scheme of things, however bad some of those things may have been. As far as dreaming everything I could dream, I think that was more of a poetic attempt at conveying the first point, but I remember feeling that I could almost travel to any feeling or vibe that I wanted to, as if I had some say when it came to how the universe stayed together. I could become whatever I wanted, psychically at least, but I chose to stay in the waking reality of River's basement, the entry after reads, "I feel like my toes wet. Keeping the babies at the den. Eat healthy." I actually felt like my big toe was wet, when in fact it was not. One might assess this misperception as a short-circuiting of my neurons, an unnerving side effect of the mycospawn, but I took it all in stride. It wasn't hard to, considering I had just freshly arrived at the realization that everything was the way that it should be, and moreover could be no other way. If the wet toe feeling were a real problem, then we would deal with the repercussions once they came. There was no use worrying about it in the meantime. I chalked it down to something like synesthesia, though rather than my senses mixing, it was more like a misplaced sensory experience, an inaccurate response to my external environment. There again was keeping babies at the den, the wisdom of being in a safe and familiar environment, while choosing to enter an infantilized state. I'm not sure if eat healthy came from the trouble with the hot tamales, but either way, it's the kind of humorously simple platitude I've come to learn Mycospawn users can encounter in the great unknown. There is a wisdom to knowing that deep down these platitudes have some truth, however bored we can be of them. And for the last entry, you can just go anywhere and enjoy every part. Why not see good in everything? Music can be what you want it to be. Everything has its own thing. The first two lines here allude to my feeling that I could explore any emotion or idea of the human experience and find the ultimate utility of it, regardless of the ostensibly negative elements those experiences or emotions may possess. For example, I could think about the sadness of a loved one's death and really sit with that sadness, but then I could easily transform it into a positive realization that despite the inevitable sadness of death, the miracle of the life was much stronger. In this state of enlightenment, the whole scope of human experience was at my fingertips, and I could see that this experience was all for the best, so indeed, why not try to see good in everything? Easier said than done in plenty of cases, obviously. The death of one's child in a school shooting, for example, feels absolutely impossible to reconcile as a necessary part of reality. Furthermore, what kind of sick conscious universe would want such a thing to be necessary? What could possibly be the utility for the greater whole? One could speculate that perhaps the children who were killed would have been destined for a somehow more horrific death if the shooting had never happened, or that they even could have grown up to cause more destruction themselves. But again, of course these are no great comforts for parents. They are desperate rationalizations for the sake of mental gymnastics. At best, for those who believe in higher powers and reasons for everything, the senseless deaths of the innocent are a tough philosophical issue, and I won't pretend that my Silasite's gifted platitude of everything in its right place is any sort of argument. On a lighter note, the music can be what you want it to be, and everything has its own thing. Platitudes were much less problematic and much more profound for me to arrive at. I understood that the way I had been constructing my idea of good music had been short-sighted. Of course, there was the common song structure of intro, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, outro, often in 4/4 time signature in a major key. Music types know that such a formula does just the trick for the majority of people. But what I understood in this moment was that there was practically an infinite number of ways people could produce sound and call it music. And all it took for music to be successful was an audience that understood both where the music was coming from and what it was getting at. Though heavy metal sounds abrasive and dark to the easy listening type, the heavy metal fans love the music for what I found in the moment to be obvious reasons. Perhaps they simply find it cathartic in response to the dark chaos of life they feel, or that we all feel, for that matter. Yes, this can be boiled down to musical taste is mostly subjective, but it was a powerful feeling to understand that as long as I made music that came from a truly felt vision, it was good enough regardless of its reception. And so it was crystal clear to me that music could be whatever one wished it to be, and every type of music had its own thing. It was an explication of the see the best in everything platitude/epiphany. Thus concluded River and I's second successful Mycospawn journey together. We did end up listening to my track Cotton Serpent, as I had planned, and I was blown away by how the Mycospawn seemed to amplify the song's essential vibes far beyond what I had mixed on GarageBand. Though I had a hunch that it would at least feel that way, one can never truly prepare for what the Mycospawn will reveal, for it could have just as easily made me feel the opposite. The whole experience left me itching for more exploration of the great unknown and more musical progress, two things I didn't need to wait long for.